Marcus had dreamed of this day for years. After saving every spare dollar, after working endless late nights, after living in small apartments where the walls felt too close, he was finally standing in front of his own house. A real home. A place that belonged to him. The moving truck stood parked at the curb, its back door open with boxes stacked inside. The afternoon sun was warm, and the street looked peaceful. Neatly trimmed lawns, white fences, cars parked perfectly in driveways. It all seemed like the kind of neighborhood where people smiled at each other, where children rode bicycles without fear, where everyone belonged. Marcus wanted to believe. This was his fresh start. He stepped out of the truck carrying a box labeled kitchen and walked up the stone path to the front door. He unlocked it, smiling at the satisfying click of the key sliding into his lock. That sound meant ownership. It meant victory. But before he could take the box inside, he heard the sound of heels clicking against the pavement. When he looked up, a woman was striding across the street toward him. She was middle-aged, sharp-featured, and dressed in a neat blouse tucked into beige pants. In her hands was a clipboard filled with papers. Marcus expected a polite greeting, maybe a welcome to the neighborhood. Instead, her eyes narrowed like a spotlight on him. "Excuse me," she said firmly, not even introducing herself. "What exactly are you doing here?" The question caught him off guard. Marcus blinked, then gestured at the moving truck. "I'm moving in." He lifted the box in his hands as proof, trying to keep his tone polite. But the woman's frown deepened. "This property doesn't belong to you. Residents here don't just show up like this. Where's the homeowner?" Marcus set the box down gently on the porch. He pulled out his house keys, letting them jingle in the sunlight. "I am the homeowner. Closed the deal last week. This is my house now." Instead of relief or welcome, the woman's lips pressed into a thin, suspicious line. She glanced up and down the street, then back at Marcus as if she were studying an intruder. "That doesn't sound right," she muttered. "I know every family in this community, and I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're not lost?" Her tone was sharp, filled with a false politeness that carried more insult than kindness. Marcus felt something stir inside him, a familiar heaviness. He had dealt with this kind of suspicion too many times before, at stores where he was followed, on sidewalks where car doors clicked locked as he passed, in meetings where his presence was doubted before his words were saw, even heard. He wanted to sigh, but instead he kept his voice steady. "I know what house I bought. My name is Marcus Williams. I live here now." Still, the woman didn't move. Instead, she adjusted her clipboard and gave a practiced official look, as though she were an authority figure. "Well, I'm Carol. I'm on the HOA board, and I think I'll need to see some proof, because what you're saying doesn't match what I know about this neighborhood." Her words stung more than he wanted to admit. He had imagined his first day here filled with excitement, unpacking, setting up furniture, maybe even meeting friendly neighbors. Instead, the first person to greet him was accusing him of not belonging. Marcus took a slow breath, holding back his frustration. He didn't want to make a scene, not on his first day, but Carol's eyes, cold and judgmental, made it clear she wasn't simply curious. She had already decided he was out of place. And for Marcus, that truth cut deeper than any box cutter. He had used to open his belongings. Carol did not step back. She stood firm, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Her eyes scanned Marcus as though he were a problem that needed to be solved, not a new neighbor to be welcomed. "You can't just walk into a home here," she said, her tone sharper now. "This is a private community. We have rules. Strangers don't get to just wander around." Marcus tilted his head, his brows rising slightly. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I'm not wandering," he said patiently. "I bought this home. I'm moving in, that's all." Carol gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Bought this house? No, I don't think so. I know the family that used to live here, and they wouldn't sell to, well." Her voice trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Marcus felt the weight of those unfinished words pressing down on him. He had heard them before, though usually whispered behind his back. She didn't even try to hide it. Still, he refused to let anger take control. He had learned long ago that some people looked for excuses to twist his actions into aggression. He wouldn't give her that chance. "Look," Marcus said calmly. "I have the paperwork inside. The deed, the mortgage approval, everything. I worked hard for this house. I don't need to prove it to you, but if you really want to see proof, I can show you." But Carol shook her head like a teacher scolding a child. "That won't be necessary. I'll handle this myself. People like you don't just appear in this neighborhood. You must be lying. Or worse." The words hit Marcus like a slap. "People like you." That phrase burned in his chest. His hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he quickly forced them open again. He wouldn't let her see his frustration. Instead, he said, "I told you, I live here. You don't get to decide otherwise." Carol's eyes flashed with defiance. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Fine. If you won't leave, I'll call security. And the police if I have to. You can explain yourself to them." Marcus's heart sank. He knew exactly how dangerous those words could be. A false call, a biased assumption, a few wrong moves, and his life could be at risk. He had seen it happen too many times to men who looked like him. His chest tightened, but he stood tall. "You don't need to do that. This is my property. I'm not trespassing." But Carol was already dialing, speaking loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. "Yes, hello? There's a suspicious black man trespassing at 1482 Maple Drive. He says he lives here, but I know he doesn't. Please send someone quickly." Her words rang out like sirens echoing across the quiet street. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open. One by one, neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the sound of Carol's voice. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed at the edge of Marcus's yard. Some crossed their arms, watching him with wary eyes. Others whispered quietly to each other. None of them stepped forward to welcome him. Marcus felt the heat of their stares burning into his skin. The box he had carried still sat on the porch, untouched, as though it too was being judged. He looked around at the gathering faces, and for the first time that day, he wondered if this new beginning was already poisoned. But deep inside, beneath the anger and the humiliation, a steady voice whispered, "Stay calm. Don't give them what they want. You know the truth. You belong here." So Marcus stood tall, silent, and unshaken, even as the woman across from him, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, prepared to turn his first day into a nightmare. The street that had been peaceful only minutes ago now felt heavy with tension. Carol's voice had carried far, and her words had already painted Marcus as a criminal in the eyes of the neighbors. Even before the police arrived, the damage was done. A few people whispered on the sidewalk, glancing at Marcus as though they were trying to decide whether to be afraid or curious. One man with folded arms muttered, "If she called the cops, maybe something's wrong." Another shook her head and whispered, "He looks harmless, but you never know." Marcus stood, still on his porch, his shoulders squared, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Inside, he was anything but calm. Every muscle in his body wanted to shout, to defend himself, to ask these strangers why they believed Carol without question. But he held it in. He had been in tense situations before. He knew the wrong word, the wrong movement, could turn suspicion into danger. Carol, meanwhile, was relishing the attention. With her phone still in hand, she addressed the neighbors as if she were some kind of authority. "I've been on the HOA board for 6 years, she declared. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't, and this man definitely doesn't. He claims he lives here, but I'll let the police sort it out." Her words stung Marcus deeply. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the way she said this man, as though he had no name, no history, no humanity. The minutes felt long. Then in the distance, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Red and blue lights flashed against the rows of houses as 2 patrol cars rolled up. The neighbors stepped back, some looking relieved, others simply eager for the drama to unfold. Marcus's heart thudded hard against his chest. He reminded himself to stay calm, to keep his hands visible, to move slowly. He knew the drill. He had lived this reality before, even though it should never have been his burden. Two officers stepped out of their vehicles. Their eyes immediately went to Marcus, standing on the porch with a box at his feet. One of them placed a hand lightly, near his holster, not drawing his weapon but reminding Marcus it was there. "Sir," the taller officer called out, his voice firm but cautious. "We got a call about someone trespassing here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Marcus nodded slowly, speaking evenly. "Yes, officer. There's been a misunderstanding. This is my home. I just moved in today. My name is Marcus Williams." Carol quickly jumped in, her voice sharp. "He's lying. I told you I know this neighborhood. He doesn't belong here. He's trying to break in. Arrest him before he does something." The officers exchanged glances, then looked back at Marcus. "Do you have any identification?" one asked. Marcus had expected this. Carefully, with steady movements, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He showed them his driver's license, then turned to the box on the porch where he had left a folder. "My deed and closing papers are in here. I can show you." The officers stepped forward, checking the documents. They studied the papers, the signatures, the official stamps. Slowly, their posture began to change. The tension in their shoulders eased. One officer looked back at Carol. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "these documents are legitimate. Mr. Williams is the legal owner of this property." The crowd murmured in surprise. Some neighbors frowned at Carol. Others avoided looking at Marcus, ashamed of their silence. But Carol was not finished. She shook her head, her face twisted with disbelief. "No, that can't be right. There's no way he could afford this house. You must be making a mistake. Check again." Marcus felt the sting of those words sink deep. It wasn't just doubt, it was contempt. No matter what proof he gave, to her he would never be enough. But Marcus stayed silent. He let the truth sit between them, undeniable and unshakable. Because no matter what she believed, this was his home and nothing she said could change that. The flashing lights faded into the background as the officers finished looking over Marcus's documents. The taller one gave a slow nod, then looked directly at Carol. His voice carried authority. "Ma'am, everything checks out. Mr. Williams is the legal owner of this property. He's not trespassing." The words were simple, but they hit like a hammer. The crowd that had gathered shifted uneasily. Some people looked relieved, others looked embarrassed, and a few turned away, ashamed at how quickly they had assumed the worst. But Carol? She refused to accept it. Her face tightened, her lips curling as if the truth itself was offensive. "No," she snapped. "There must be some mistake. You don't understand. People like him don't move into communities like this. He doesn't belong here. He's lying. He has to be lying." Marcus's chest ached as the words struck him again. He had dealt with suspicion before, but hearing it so openly, in front of everyone, cut deeper than he expected. His dream of a quiet, welcoming home was being shredded on the very first day. The shorter officer shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, we've seen his ID, his deed, and the closing papers. They're real. He lives here now. You need to step back." The neighbors began whispering louder. A woman from across the street muttered, "I can't believe this. She really tried to call the cops on him." Another shook his head. "This isn't right. She went too far." For the first time, Carol seemed to notice the shift in the crowd. But instead of backing down, she raised her chin higher. "You're all being fooled," she insisted. "You'll regret this when you find out the truth about him. I know his type. Trouble always follows." Marcus clenched his jaw. He felt his patience slipping, but he forced himself to stay calm. His voice when he spoke was steady and quiet, yet filled with emotion. "I told you already. My name is Marcus Williams. I worked for years to afford this home. I don't owe you an explanation, but I want you to hear this clearly. I belong here." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The officers gave small nods of agreement, clearly done with Carol's accusations. But Carol's face twisted with frustration. She turned to the officers, almost pleading. "Don't you see? He's dangerous. Look at him. You have to do something. The taller officer finally lost his patience. His voice grew sharp. "Ma'am, that's enough. There's no crime here. If you continue harassing this man, you could be charged yourself. Do you understand? The warning landed hard. For the first time, Carol hesitated. Her eyes flicked from the officers to the neighbors, and she realized she was losing the control she thought she had. Marcus stood silently, watching her, but inside, he felt torn. Part of him wanted to shout, to release all the frustration boiling inside. But another part of him knew silence spoke louder than any argument. By simply standing tall, by refusing to break, he showed everyone the truth. One by one, the neighbors began to disperse. Some lingered, still watching, but the spell Carol had cast over them was broken. A few even looked at Marcus with regret, in their eyes as if silently apologizing for believing her words too quickly. The officers gave Marcus a nod of respect. "We're sorry you had to go through this, sir. Congratulations on your new home." Marcus nodded back, though his throat felt tight. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," not just for their words, but for the recognition that, at least in this moment, the truth was seen. As the patrol cars left and the flashing lights faded into the distance, the street grew quiet again. But the silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, filled with shame, tension, and the undeniable truth that something had been broken in this neighborhood. And it couldn't be fixed easily. And yet, Marcus stood there on his porch, steady and unshaken, determined not to let anyone steal what he had worked so hard to build. The street was beginning to calm, yet tension still lingered in the air. The neighbors who had not gone back inside stayed close, their eyes darting between Marcus and Carol. Even after the police had confirmed everything, Carol refused to let go of her belief. Her face was stiff, her pride wounded, but her tongue, sharp as ever. "This isn't over," she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'll be filing a complaint with the HOA. We can't just let anyone move in. This neighborhood has standards." Marcus had been silent, letting her words pass like stones thrown into a river. But inside, a storm was building. He had tried patience, he had tried calm. Still, she refused to see him for who he was. She refused to accept the truth even with evidence right in front of her. The officers had already warned her, yet she continued to push, her arrogance blinding her. That was when Marcus decided he had had enough. He wasn't just any man standing on a porch. He wasn't just another homeowner. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to remind her of that. He reached slowly into his wallet again. The neighbors watched closely, and for a moment even Carol went quiet. Marcus pulled out a small polished badge and held it up where the sunlight caught it. The golden shield gleamed, and the letters engraved on it spoke louder than any argument ever could. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The crowd froze. The whispers stopped. Even the two officers who had already seen his paperwork looked surprised. Marcus's voice was calm, but it carried weight. "You've treated me like a criminal since the moment I stepped on my own porch. You called the police, accused me, humiliated me, all because you decided I didn't belong. But let me make this clear. Not only am I the legal owner of this home, I also serve this country. I work with the FBI, and I know exactly what discrimination looks like." His words hit the street like thunder. Neighbors who had once whispered doubts now stood stunned, their faces shifting from curiosity to guilt. A few looked down at the pavement, unable to meet his eyes. Carol's mouth fell open, but no words came out at first. Her clipboard shook in her hands. She tried to speak but only managed to stammer, I didn't know. I was only trying to protect the community." Marcus turned his gaze directly on her. His eyes were calm, but they carried a strength that cut through every excuse. "No," he said softly. "You weren't protecting the community. You were protecting your own prejudice. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. Nothing more." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone could feel the truth in his words. One of the neighbors, a man who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "She's been doing this for years," he said, his voice low but firm. "Always questioning people, always acting like she owns the whole street. But this This went too far. Carol's face turned red. She spun around, looking at the neighbors she once believed were on her side, but their expressions showed only disappointment and disapproval. Her power had crumbled in a single moment. Marcus lowered his badge and slid it back into his wallet. He didn't flash it as a weapon, only as a reminder that respect should not be conditional, that dignity was not something to be granted or denied by one person's opinion. He bent down, picked up the moving box from the porch and carried it inside his house. His movements were calm, deliberate, like a man reclaiming what was his all along. For the first time since the ordeal began, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. This was his home, and no one, not Carol, not suspicion, not prejudice, could take that away from him. The golden badge had silenced the street, but the silence did not last long. As Marcus carried his box into the house, the neighbors began whispering again. Only this time their voices carried a different tone. "He's with the FBI," one woman murmured in shock. "All this over nothing," another man said, shaking his head. "She could have ruined his life." Ruined his life? She could have gotten him killed, someone else whispered, their voice trembling. Those words made the truth heavier. What had started as an accusation of trespassing could have ended far worse. Everyone knew it. The weight of that reality hung in the air like a storm cloud. Carol still stood there, clutching her clipboard as though it could protect her. But her confidence was gone. Her face was pale, her hands trembled, and her voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. I was only doing my duty," she said, glancing at the neighbors as though begging for support. "I wanted to keep the neighborhood safe. I didn't mean..." But no one came to her rescue. The very people who used to nod along to her rules and her authority were now staring at her with disappointment, even anger. A mother holding her child close stepped forward, her voice firm. "You called the police on a man standing in front of his own house. You didn't even give him a chance. Do you have any idea what could have happened?" Carol's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Another neighbor, an older man with tired eyes, added, "This wasn't about safety. This was about control. You've been lording over everyone in this neighborhood for years, but today you went too far." We all saw it. The crowd murmured in agreement. The shift was clear. The power Carol once thought she held in this community had vanished, slipping away the moment her lies were exposed. Marcus reappeared on the porch, now without the box. He stood silently, listening to the neighbors. He didn't smile or gloat. He only watched, his presence a quiet reminder of the truth. Carol looked at him, her lips trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice low but desperate. "If I had known you were with the FBI, I never would have..." Marcus cut her off, his voice calm but sharp. "That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's job to treat them with respect. I shouldn't have to flash a badge for you to believe I belong here." His words struck deeper than any badge ever could. The neighbors lowered their eyes, guilt heavy in their silence. Many of them knew he was right, not only about Carol, but about themselves too. They had stood and watched, too quick to doubt, too slow to defend. The two officers who had stayed quietly nearby finally stepped forward. One of them looked at Carol with clear disapproval. "Ma'am, consider this your final warning. If we get another call like this about this man without real cause, you'll be the one in trouble." Carol's face flushed red. She nodded, stiffly, but her pride was shattered. As the patrol cars drove away, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Some neighbors, ashamed, avoided Marcus's eyes. Others, braver, stepped closer. A man in his 40s spoke first. "Marcus, and welcome to the neighborhood. I'm sorry for what happened. It shouldn't have gone this way." A woman holding a casserole dish stepped forward too, her voice soft. "We'd like to make it up to you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Marcus gave a small nod, his voice quiet but steady. "Thank you. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I just wanted a home." As the evening sun dipped behind the houses, Marcus sat on his porch. He could still feel the sting of humiliation, the weight of judgment. But he also felt something else. A shift. The community had seen the truth. And while it would take time for trust to grow, one thing was certain. Carol no longer had the power she once believed she held. For Marcus, that was enough for now. He had faced prejudice head-on and stood his ground. And though the day had been harder than he ever imagined, he knew one thing with certainty. This was his home, and no one could take it away. That night the street was quiet again. The flashing lights were gone, the whispers had faded, and most of the neighbors had retreated behind their doors. But for Marcus, the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was heavy, like the air after a storm. He sat on his porch steps, his hands resting loosely on his knees, staring out at the rows of houses. Boxes still sat inside, waiting to be unpacked. He should have been celebrating his first evening in his new home, maybe opening a bottle of wine, maybe calling family to say, "I did it. I finally have a house." But instead, he was left with the bitter memory of being treated like a criminal in front of everyone. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister lit up the screen. "How's the new place? Did the move go okay?" Marcus stared at the words for a long time. He wanted to lie, to say everything was perfect, to protect her from the pain of knowing what had happened. But he also knew the truth mattered. He typed slowly. "It was rough. The first person I met accused me of trespassing. Called the cops on me. But I'm okay. I stood my ground." He hit send, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. His chest felt heavy, but also lighter, because he knew he hadn't let the ugliness break him. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Williams?" Marcus looked up to see the woman who had spoken up earlier, the mother who had scolded Carol. She was standing at the edge of his driveway, her child now asleep on her shoulder. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You didn't deserve any of that. She doesn't speak for all of us." Marcus gave a small nod. "Thank you. That means a lot." She smiled faintly, then carried her child back home. A few minutes later, another neighbor, the older man with tired eyes, walked over. He extended his hand, his grip steady. "Welcome to the neighborhood, son. I should have spoken up sooner. I regret staying quiet." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "It's all right. I know how fear works, but silence can be just as loud as words." The man's eyes softened and he nodded before walking away. One by one, a few more neighbors trickled over, some bringing food, others offering help with the boxes. Their gestures didn't erase the pain of earlier, but they were small steps toward something better. From across the street, Carol watched through her curtains. She no longer held her clipboard. She no longer carried her pride. For the first time, she looked powerless. The neighborhood she had once commanded with authority had turned its back on her. Marcus saw her shadow in the window, but didn't pay her any attention. She no longer mattered. Instead, he focused on the quiet strength that filled him. He thought about the years of hard work that had led him here. The long nights at the bureau, the sacrifices, the dreams. This house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was proof of everything he had fought for. He whispered to himself, his voice steady in the night air. "This is my home, and no one can take that away from me." As the stars appeared above, the neighborhood seemed to settle into a new kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but of reflection. Marcus rose from the porch steps and stepped inside his home. The boxes were waiting, the walls bare, but it already felt like his place. Tomorrow he would unpack. Tomorrow he would start fresh. And tomorrow, when he stepped outside again, he would do so with his head held high, because he had already faced the worst of their doubt and come out stronger. For the first time all day, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. This was not the beginning he had imagined, but it was still the beginning of something new. Something better. The storm had passed, and Marcus knew deep in his heart that he was exactly where he was meant to be.